So why don't you tell us a little bit about just the farm and what you're doing here, what you got going on?
I'd love to. So my name is Julian Erggelet. So we've been farming on this location, the Urban Edge Farm, since 2018. It's a 34-acre property that was an established fruit orchard, although most of the tree stock was old and planting was subprime. So we've been continuously replanting about 15 acres over the last 2 years. We're at about 25 acres of mixed stone fruit now. Probably about 65 different varietals of stone fruit, all marketed to a fresh market, mainly UPIC. And in addition to that, we have, we've been experimenting with other varietals of trees. We have avocados right behind you, propagating figs on site. We have some citrus trees, and we just planted a 4.5 acre vineyard as well. So our hope is to really bring back this analog of a farm that has many different outputs and that does value addition on site. So we have a small winery on site. We work with other community members and make products. We dry fruit, and we sell it all through our farm store. And in addition to that, mainly based on the legacy that we started with first generation farmers, which was all vegetable, we have a going 5-acre vegetable program, which is chemical free, no fertilizer, no sprays, that mainly services food access programs. So I would say about 20% go through the farm store. This is a year-round vegetable program. And 80% go towards most notable 2 food access programs, which is Edible Schoolyard. There's a satellite program in Stockton and Urban Tilth out of Richmond. Parts education, part community equity building, restorative agriculture, and just a family farm producing the best peaches in Contra, Costa.
So what management practices do you employ out here on the farm that are climate smart, I guess?
In general, my approach to management is to create a system that I don't work against the system, but we can work with the system. So when we decide what for trees to plant, how to plant them, layout of other plantings, we try to figure out how they can work together. Mm-hmm. And how we can minimize use of equipment, how we can minimize a risk through dust intrusion, how we can work with seasonality, that we don't have to go right through a wet patch to get to the field that we're trying to work. So we're interspersed small patches of vegetables that we rotate before we, when we take out an orchard. We always do full orchard mulching. We spread about 300 to 400 loads of wood chips. All the pathways, all the open space is covered in wood chips, which contributes to soil building, carbon capture, and so on and so forth. So that's a practice that we've established on other locations, and that works great for us in dust mitigation and also in ground prep. Mm-hmm. Typically, if we remove an orchard, we will rotate in with we'll cover crop off season, and then we'll rotate in 2 to 3 years of vegetables. That's why we have many different plots of vegetables interspersed, which is fun and interesting. It breaks it up a bit. And then we will go back and cover with perennial crops, which will be a tree or vines or other perennial crops that we'll bring on to a location, or we'll leave it in a vegetable rotation, depending on what the need and seasonality is. There's no open ground. Either it's cover cropped or it's wood chipped. We move to perennial cover crops in the orchards and in the vineyards. Right behind you, there's a perennial cover crop stand. We've done well with those perennial cover crops after realizing that annual cover crops in tree systems or vine systems don't establish, especially through the drought, just for lack of irrigation. And irrigating a cover crop for me is an oxymoron, so I wouldn't resort to that. So perennial cover crops have done well with a mix of clover, annual ryegrass, other fescues. So all of the new orchards and vineyards that we've established have that perennial cover crop, and we always throw in 3 to 5% of wildflowers, native wildflowers, just to make it a bee-friendly habitat. So I think guiding principle: cover cropped or wood chipped, no open ground.
Can you tell us a little bit about the hedgerow we've got here behind us?
Oh, we love hedgerows. We planted the first about 2,000 feet of hedgerow here, hedgerow windbreak, in 2018 on NRCS funding, and established it. wraps around this whole side of the property, row of trees, and then a row of shrubs. There was some forbs interplanted. They unfortunately died on this section. Other sections, they're established well. Also for our crew, it was good to have a small system to understand how to manage irrigation, how to integrate a hedgerow, which is there's no financial benefit to the farm. It sucks work. The grant funding is done after 2 or 3 years, but it's a continual process. We wood chip, we have to remove weeds manually, we have to maintain irrigation, we have to prune, so having this as an analog to understand how to best manage and to establish best practices on site. And we're embarking on planting an additional 4,000 feet of hedgerow, windbreak, and pollination space, and basically on the whole perimeter of this property, which is the big project we're pursuing this year.
So what are we looking at here, Julian?
We're looking at plant stock for hedgerow planting. So this is about 1,500 plants of all sizes, plugs up to 1 gallon pots. This is about enough for 3,500 feet of hedgerow and windbreak. And then we lay them out next to the nursery and we grow them up. So we make them hardy here on site. And then whenever we have the space, we talked about using labor on site as resourceful as possible. So whenever we have space and time, we grow our hedgerow 100 feet at a time, 200 feet at a time, which is limited. We mulch everything very diligently with about 6 to 8 inches of mulch. And we run the irrigation at the same time. So we basically block it out, 100 to 200 foot segments, and that can be done on a rolling basis. And if the plant stock is on site, all these plants are doing are getting hardier and stronger. And we can control irrigation. We can make sure that they're weaned off fertilizer if they come from nurseries that use fertilizer, which these all don't. So there's benefits on having it on site. So I would encourage any aspiring hedgerow implementer to map out plants, get a 25% overage, buy them smaller, and establish them on site, and not having that pressure of planting everything at one time, but doing it bit for bit. Even if this is someone who has a small 2-acre farm, planting 20 plants every Saturday, mulching them, running irrigation, capping the irrigation, making sure everything works, and just doing it bit for bit, and just have 2 pallets of plants sitting in front of the garage. And that's something that I think is very daunting, but then, if you have a backup, you can replant plants that, gophers get to, that desiccate, that die. Just having your own stock creates your nursery on site, and I feel like that reduces the daunting fear of installing a system like this. Yeah. So that's what we do every season. We look at the grants that we have, and the systems that we're trying to implement, which is this year about 3,600 foot of linear foot of windbreak and hedgerow on the Healthy Soils program, and some tree covers. So we got all the plants for the install, and we'll be installing it over the next 6 to 8 months.
So for farmers that maybe haven't started or are just maybe starting to get an interest in government funding, Healthy Soils program, NRCS, or wanting to get into this regenerative agriculture, what are your recommendations for them? What are the questions they need to be asking of themselves, of their operation? What's the first step forward for them?
The thought process is happening in farmers big and small. The tricky thing is to capture the I should be doing things different to what is it that I can do that is applicable for me. The smaller the farm, the smaller the budget, and the less leeway for new implementations. A lot of the grant funding systems, they're reimbursement systems. So you need to be able to allocate funds that you do not have to implement practices that you don't fully understand, to then maybe get a refund if your documentation that you're not experienced in is completely incorrect. And that's 3 big hurdles that big farmers don't want to deal with and small farmers are daunted by. So I think having the practices be communicated more directly and basically saying this is what you can do, not there's a catalog of 50 practices, choose one. No, going in and saying these 2 things make sense for you, and and being able to help identify those, and then how can they be implemented without disrupting the current flow of an operation and without strapping anyone for their cash flow. You know, I encourage farmers to go ask other farmers. I think a lot of old timers shy away because there's industry secrets, but you know, if you look at us and the new generation of farming, there's a lot more willingness to just share ideas because there's less competitiveness. Because the common goal is not just the bottom line. The common goal is to, you know, is longevity, is restoring ground, and is, you know, building community equity, and no one can do that alone.